you. Can I just tell you that you was really great back then, man? Those guards, they thought they was all of that. Then you showed up and bam, they was tripping over themselves like babes in the woods. See that? That really made me feel good to see that.
Oh, that's great.
Atmosphere with drops of Jupiter in her head.
You're a wizard, Harry.
Yeah, my name is Stuart.
Stuart, where are you right now?
I'm working at a restaurant in Soho.
All right, so tell us what you saw, if you would.
I was waiting at a table and I literally saw it seemed to be like a small plane. I just heard a couple noises. It looked like it bounced off the building, and then I just saw a huge ball of fire on top. And then the smoke seemed to simmer down, and it just, a lot of smoke was coming out, and that's pretty much the extent of what I saw.
Can you tell us about the scene down there right now?
Right now, people are just on the street looking at the building. The building, there was just a lot of smoke.
Good afternoon. On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. These carefully targeted actions are designed to disrupt the use of Afghanistan as a terrorist base of operations and to attack the military capability of the Taliban regime. We are joined in this operation by our staunch friend, Great Britain. Other close friends, including Canada, Australia, Germany, and France, have pledged forces as the operation unfolds. More than 40 countries in the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and across Asia.
2001 was a critical year not just for the United States, but for the entire world. On September 11, 2001, 4 commercial airliners traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast were hijacked by a total of 19 terrorists, split into 4 groups, later identified to be al-Qaeda. Their main goal was to commandeer their respective airliners and crash each plane into a prominent American building, causing mass devastation, damage, and death in the process. The targets were the Pentagon, a building in Washington, D.C., and the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. One of the planes crashed in a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after a revolt from the passengers. Another plane hit the west side of the Pentagon. The 2 remaining planes struck the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, causing both buildings to collapse inside of 2 hours. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives as a result of these attacks, with many more, including countless first responders, suffering life-altering injuries as well as emotional and mental trauma. It is regarded as the worst terrorist attack in history. But the morning of September 11th was only the beginning.
Given the nature and reach of our enemies, we will win this conflict by the patient accumulation of successes, by meeting a series of challenges with determination and will and purpose. Today we focus on Afghanistan, but the battle is broader. Every nation has a choice to make. In this conflict, there is no neutral ground.
If you picture the trajectory of the United States as a massive boat moving through an ocean, the attacks on September 11, 2001 marked a sharp turn of the wheel. An event that significantly altered the course of the country and the world, and whose effects have been felt even to this very day. Just like that small adjustment in the ship's trajectory would lead to massive changes in the long run, so the same was with the country after September 11th. On March 20th, 2003, President George W. Bush officially announced the beginning of the Iraq War.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
A war mixed in controversy from all sides, and one that would keep the United States embroiled in conflict for years to come, and would include the relentless media coverage on every single opinion, criticism, and doubt from every corner of the political arena. The early 2000s were busy years, which makes it even more bizarre that despite all of it, one news story emerged and more than that, managed to rise to the level of capturing the attention of the entire country, despite the havoc and turmoil running rampant at the time. The story of a girl who went missing on Christmas Eve of 2002, and whose case would be the focus of much discussion and controversy, right down to this very day. It goes without saying that in a case like this, a decade old, which drew a considerable amount of media attention and critical discussion, countless news articles, videos, and analysis pieces, there is quite a bit to sort through regarding the details of the case, the events that transpired, the order in which they transpired, and the public and familial reaction to some of the case's big reveals as investigators move towards an ultimate conclusion. With all that being said, in this video I will move through the events of the case mainly in chronological order, as they happened and as they were revealed to the public. As I do so, I'll discuss some of the analysis and perception of the public regarding the case based on the information available at the time. Where appropriate, I will also try to demonstrate an opposing view to that which was popular during that stage in the case. December 24th of 2002. Laci and Scott Peterson woke up together in their home in Modesto, California. Scott had plans that morning originally to go golfing, later changed to fishing, so after eating breakfast and watching television, he left to go to his warehouse where he would answer a few emails and get his boat, which he would take to Berkeley Marina, and fish for about an hour and a half. This would later be corroborated by timestamps on his emails and a receipt from the marina. Meanwhile, Laci, who was 8 months pregnant with their son Connor, would take the dog out for a walk and subsequently would vanish. Neighbors would report seeing the family dog running around alone later that day. After fishing, Scott Peterson would return his boat to the warehouse, go back home, and shower. He would later say that he believed Laci had gone to her mother's house, which is why when he returned home and Laci wasn't there, it didn't prompt any red flags. Soon after this, Laci's stepfather reported her missing to police, and very soon after this, an investigation into Laci's whereabouts was started. Since it was assumed that Laci was walking her dog when she went missing, Scott Peterson met Modesto police that day at a nearby dog park, where Laci most likely would have taken the dog for a walk. As Laci's husband, Scott was immediately suspect number 1 for police in her disappearance. They would bring him in for questioning that very evening, Christmas Eve, 2002. Something to keep in mind as we watch the following police interview of Scott Peterson. At this point, the police obviously viewed him as the number 1 potential suspect. However, due to how early it is in the investigation, there is little to no evidence that would actually point to Scott as a suspect. Therefore, this line of questioning at this point simply has the goal of information gathering in order to establish Scott's timeline. At this time in the investigation, there simply isn't anything to prove or disprove Scott's version of events. However, an analysis of Scott's responses might give us insight on what the detective could be thinking and perhaps what Scott's motives are.
Pretty much, Scott, all I'm going to do, let's just go over what we already talked about so I can make some notes. See if you remember something that maybe you don't know you remember. So, today, just tell me about the morning.
Okay. I don't know what time we got up. Probably Laci got up and went and assumed she had some cereal for breakfast. She her favorite show, Martha Stewart. Watched a little bit of that.
You didn't watch the whole thing, though.
No.
You remember what part you saw? I mean, I don't know what
Some cooking deal. I don't know. Cookies of some sort. They're talking about what to do with meringue.
And I can't remember, your house, you had the converted garage area, is that your TV room like? Or
Yeah.
Is that where you were then? Okay, did you eat any breakfast?
Yeah, full cereal.
Okay, and then, what? When did you realize you were gonna go fishing?
Oh, that was a morning decision. It's either
That was a morning
go
decision.
play golf at the club or go fishing.
Okay.
Seemed too cold to go play golf at the club, so yeah, just decided to 9:30 or whatever that. Just told her what she was going to do for the day, and
Okay, so Bob, she told you what she was gonna do for the day,
yeah.
and what was that?
She's going to finish cleaning up. Like I said, she's mopping the kitchen floor. Take the dog for a walk, and then she's going to the store to buy for Christmas morning breakfast tomorrow. And that was going to be involved prep. So that was her afternoon, was prepping for breakfast, and she's going to make gingerbread cookies for tonight.
What was she mopping?
The tile in the entryway area.
The entry of your front door or the entry of your little interior converted?
Well, not the front door, but that back door that we came in.
Right, where the mop was outside of it?
No.
Where your dogs, one out to your backyard?
Okay, we have the converted garage,
Yeah.
right? Then you have the kitchen,
Yeah.
and then you have a room with 2 chairs in it.
Right.
Yeah, that room, and the kitchen. I don't know how far she planned to go. She had me put the bucket by the front door for her.
So she asked you to put the mop bucket by the front door?
Yeah, she's 8 months pregnant, not gonna pick it up or anything, so I filled it up for her. Put it in a central place.
How did you move it back after or when you come home, or how did it get outside? Yeah.
Yeah.
So you put it out there?
Dog and cat ran in. Yeah, she wasn't about to lift anything heavy.
So when you left, do you remember what she was wearing?
Black pants, white long sleeve top.
The kind of buttons or?
No, just like a long sleeve t-shirt kind of thing, but didn't say anything on it or.
Jacket or shoes?
No.
No shoes? Do you notice if her jacket was there? Or did she wear it, like if she went walking at 10 o'clock or 9:30,
She just steals my stuff.
she uses your stuff?
Yeah, doesn't return his stuff, so I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know. She could have had hers or mine or nothing, I don't know.
How about shoes? Does she have a certain kind of shoes that she walks in? Or
Yeah, I used a pair of white tennis shoes.
did you remember if they were there or not?
Vouchers, I looked for them in their normal place, which is outside by our wet bar. They were not there, but we didn't look further, so they could be in the house. They weren't where they normally left. You saw mine where those were. That's where they normally keep.
Okay, so then about 9:30 you left, and you drove your 4-door truck. and you went over to your shop?
Right.
And what did you do over there?
I assembled my mortiser. You know what a mortiser is?
No.
It's a woodworking tool to make tables. Maybe you saw it on the trailer there. About yay big.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got that, so I assembled it. Checked my email. Sent one email. Then hooked the boat up and went
Who'd you send the email to?
to Eric Van Enos, my boss. The happy holidays email. He left me a message on my phone this morning.
Eric Van Enos?
Mhm.
I spell Enos.
INNIS.
You know his phone number?
Scott's story of sending an email that morning, as we mentioned earlier, would be corroborated. However, some who are at this point more critical and suspicious of Scott might wonder, why drive all the way to his workshop to send one Happy Holidays email? The interrogating officer asks him, "Who did you email?" And Scott immediately has the answer queued up. Now, it could be that since he was going to the warehouse anyway, he figured he might as well email his boss while he was there. And since it was the only email he sent that morning, of course it would be at the forefront of his mind when asked about it by the interrogating officer. But again, the more critical listeners might see this as Scott beginning to try to set up a soft alibi.
Did you tell him about this yet?
No.
Get the 559 in?
No, this is going to be a number in Portugal.
Portugal? That's where your boss is?
Yeah. To access internationally, dial 011. Country code is 35. The number is 191. That's his mobile number.
Does he have a home? Do you have that or
I
not?
don't have a home number for him.
Do you know what his email was or?
It's E. Van Enos. Hell, I don't know.
That's what
Does
he live in Portugal? He lives there?
Yeah, Portugal.
Speak English?
Yeah, very well. He's a Belgian guy.
Okay, so you assembled this, what was the thing you assembled called?
Called a mortiser. For mortise and tenon joints.
You stop for lunch?
No.
You buy bait?
No, I'm a bait fisherman.
You didn't buy no lunch? You didn't eat nothing? You didn't take a lunch?
No, I didn't. I was damn hungry for that pizza when I got home.
Okay, so if you got to about 5 minutes to 1, you get your boat in, how long do you think you stayed in the water?
Felt like an hour and a half or so. But I didn't have a watch or anything, but let's see if I was getting home at 30. Or 2. I don't know, an hour and a half, I guess. Probably accurate.
Did you have a map for that area, or
No.
would you just wing it? So you just, when you got in your boat and you took off, did you go very far, or?
Well, I mean, probably a couple miles. I went north, found like a little island kind of deal there. Island had a bunch of trash on it. I remember a big sign that said no landing. It looked like some broken piers around it. I just assumed it'd be a decent, shallow area.
Did you troll?
A little bit. I mean, a lot of the reason I went was just to get that boat in the water to see, Yeah.
Now, any investigator would be starting to tie a few pieces together here to form a theory, as you might be while viewing this interrogation. A man's wife goes missing, and at that same morning, he happens to go out fishing alone on his boat. He doesn't stop for lunch, he doesn't bring bait, but he's out on the water for around 90 minutes. The big question in the minds of investigators at this point: was Scott on the water to catch something that morning, or was he out there to dispose of something?
Okay, so you fish 90 minutes about, and then what, you go back to the marina, get back in your boat.
Yeah.
You see anybody, you talk to anybody out there?
Talked to a couple guys fishing, and asked me, to catch anything, and no, they didn't either. The guys working, fixing, maintenance guys got a good laugh at me trying to back down the trailer.
Okay.
So a couple guys laughing and a couple guys talking about fishing.
Then what? You drive, how did you get there?
Highways, you mean?
Yeah.
What's the highway to Oakland? It's 580?
Yeah.
And then you take 80 north, right, to go to like going to Sacramento or
So you took 580 to 80? No, okay.
yeah.
Did you, when you left, were you wearing, what were you wearing when you left?
Blue jeans and blue t-shirt.
And what were those shoes?
Oh, Timberland.
Which jacket? One in your truck?
Well, when I left the house, I didn't have a jacket on.
Right.
When I was in the warehouse, I had that green pullover on. It was in my truck, you saw. When it started raining, I had a camo jacket on in the boat. And a tan hat.
Okay, so then you went back to the shop. You unhooked the boat. What happened? What else did you do? Anything else?
No, I hooked it. I guess I saw that fax. I was late getting home, so.
The French doors were unlocked?
Just
What did you do when you go in?
dog and the cat followed me in, so I dumped out that mop water. The cat went over to it.
Where was the mop bucket?
If you remember our front door, there's a little white wood piece built in, just in front of that.
Okay, so your dog and cat come in through the doors, and your cat goes over to this bucket.
Yep,
And what was it, going to drink out of it, or?
looked like it's me.
So you just picked it up and walked it out the front door then?
No, that little side door.
Okay.
It was right outside of it.
And then you just set it out there?
Dumped it, set it in there.
And what'd you do?
Put my clothes in the washer. Took out those rags, threw my clothes in there.
Were you calling for Laci, or,
Oh yeah, of course.
but she wasn't home?
No. Assume she's at her mom's.
You put your jeans, your blue t-shirt, anything else in there?
I think that green pullover was in there too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Did you start the washer?
Yeah.
Did you put soap?
It could be that this was fairly normal behavior for Scott Peterson, but again, from the standpoint of being hypercritical of Peterson's story up to this point, it would seem rather odd that he would come back and almost immediately begin washing his clothes. It is understandable to take off dirty clothes and toss them in the hamper to wash later, but Scott arrives home and after claiming to briefly call for Laci, immediately begins the process of washing his clothes. From an investigative standpoint, this is either Scott performing a mundane chore, or Scott disposing of potential evidence.
Okay, so then you called over at Ron's?
Right.
Had they heard from her?
No. Not all day.
No, all day. Was that unusual or not?
No. I think we were supposed to be there at dinner at 6 or 6:30.
What's Laci's mom's name?
Sharon Rocha. Ron Gransky.
Okay. Are they together?
Not.
You call
Never been married, but common law marriage is what it's called. Lived together for 15 years or whatever.
All right. Well, that's her stepdad. Or
But common law marriage. I mean, she called him Ron. That's what you're asking.
So you guys were supposed to be there. You're supposed to go to dinner there tonight at 6:30, or last night at 6:30.
Right.
Okay. So you told Sharon, or did you talk to Ron?
Talked to Mom, Sharon.
And what?
I asked if Laci was there. Told me no.
Who called us?
Ron did.
Did he tell you who's going to call? Who else? Did you call other people then?
I called Sharon, and then I called a couple of Laci's closer friends, I think Stacy and Renee. And I had the phone book out to call hospitals when I think Sharon called me back at that point and said that they would do that and call the police, and for me to check the neighbors and go to the park.
We're going to do a review of all of Scott's odd behavior in a moment, but just to add to the list, Scott had not seen his wife since that morning. They were supposed to go to Laci's parents' house for dinner that evening, but neither of her parents heard from her. None of Laci's friends heard from her. So rather than call the police, Scott instead claims he called various hospitals around the area until Laci's parents finally called the police and report her missing. Again, the opposite side of this might be that Scott didn't want to blow what could have been a minor situation into something much bigger by involving the police so quickly, but skeptics of Scott's story might believe he had a different motive altogether.
Sharon,
I'm pretty sure on that sequence. I mean, I may have checked the neighbors, then come back and got the phone book.
Right, sure.
Yeah, Sharon had Ron calling the hospitals. And obviously this.
Did you do that? Did you check neighbors?
I did.
Did you go to the park?
After I checked the neighbors, came back, called Sharon one more time. She said, we're going to the park. And we had the police go in there also. So that went on, yeah.
Had any of your neighbors saw anything or heard anything?
First neighbor I checked with was directly across the street. Her name's Amy. It's her son that was talking about the white truck.
Mm-hmm.
She mentioned the Christmas light thing to me.
Tell me about that again.
She said that our outside Christmas light, the icicle ones, went on just before I got home. I didn't notice that they were on when I got home, but then she mentioned it. I looked across the street, they were on. They get plugged into an outlet. I didn't plug them in today. And then when we returned from the park, a couple hours later, they were off. So I don't know. I mean, it appeared to still be plugged in. They must have overheated or something.
So Emmy said just before you came home, the lights got turned on. She saw that.
Checked with her. Went to the left, no one was there. Left a note at Karen's. And checked to the right of Amy's.
Was there anything out of unusual, out of normal in your house?
The only unusual things were the leash and the door being unlocked.
The front door, or the French doors?
Yeah, what I'm going to call the back door.
Right. Okay, well, we're in your room and we're talking about your closet. Looked like a couple duffel bags down.
Yeah.
That was normal, or?
Yeah.
Did you get something out of the duffel bag that was on the ground, a raincoat or something today?
Out of that blue bag, the
Mhm.
Nike bag, I took my tennis shoes out of it.
The ones you wore?
No, the white ones that were out on top of the wet bar.
Did you do that recently?
This morning. I think that was this morning. But the leather brown one I just toss up there, and the other one I hardly ever use, so it's just...
How about the gun? How long's that been in your car?
Probably a month. To Lone Pine to shoot pheasants, took it with me.
Is that your gun?
It's obviously seen better days, but
Yeah, it looks like it.
I don't think I tried to shoot it once in Lone Pine, it didn't go off. So it's,
I mean, have you had it a long time?
yeah, I think I got it. Well, you know, it may be registered to me or maybe registered to my father actually, because I think I may have gotten that before I was 18. I don't know. Yeah, it's a llama. And he was a buyer on it.
So it's been in your glove box about a month?
I think so. I'd have to check the date on when I went to Lone Pine.
Lone Pine?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
South
so,
of Bishop.
right. What, you went up there pheasant hunting, obviously, but you don't use that to shoot
No.
pheasant on. Have you fired it recently?
A pistol?
Yeah.
No. Not within the past year, no.
And has Laci ever complained to you about somebody bothering her?
No, I mean, like I said, no, and I don't think it's ever come up to her and accosted her in any way. She has times that she's felt uncomfortable, and thankful she has the dog. We've called, the police a couple times about people down there just to get them to move on. And it's not uncommon for Laci or myself to, wake one of these guys or ladies up and tell them to get lost.
When you were in Lone Pine, you said you tried to fire that handgun once?
Yeah.
But what happened?
Just clicked.
Just clicked?
Yeah. When I ejected that round, and the second one clicked also. I think I ejected it. Yeah, I know I ejected it. The second one clicked.
The detective now comes back to the topic of Scott's gun, which he spoke about earlier. To a critical ear, Scott's language and description would make it appear that he's trying to distance himself from the firearm, saying he only really fired it once, and when he did, there was a misfire. Obviously, someone whose wife just vanished into thin air, who now clearly finds themselves the number one suspect, would not want to add any further suspicion by being overly familiar with firearms. The detective is now asking him about it once again. and one can only assume that he's trying to gauge Scott's true familiarity with the gun.
Would you be willing to take a polygraph?
Sure.
So what you're telling me, Scott, is you have no idea where this is.
Despite what Scott just said a minute ago, he would later refuse to take a polygraph, something that soured him for police and the public and only served to further establish him as a viable suspect in Laci's disappearance. But we'll discuss that more shortly. First, let's take a moment to summarize Scott's version of events based on his police interview. It is worth noting that Scott was asked multiple times in multiple situations about certain aspects of his timeline of events, and never did he significantly alter or change his story. His timeline remained consistent throughout the investigation, and when asked about specifics, they always lined up to the story he told in his initial police interview. And while having a consistent story is not the best barometer of truth, or in this case innocence, it is something that shouldn't be overlooked. A liar constructing a fake series of events, especially one that spans the course of hours, would have to remember and recite so many different details, constantly ensuring that when they retold the story, they didn't divulge any elements that would cast any guilt on them. In addition to this, they would be fighting against their own memory of what really happened, which more often than not can cause unintentional slip-ups when asked multiple times about their timeline. This is why in many police interrogations that span the course of hours, you'll see the detective ask the suspect repetitive questions regarding what happened, when it happened, how it happened, to see if there are any shifts in the narrative that might give away that the individual's lying. Scott Peterson's story, at the very least, remained consistent. On the morning of December 24th, the day Laci went missing, Scott says Laci woke up at around 7 a.m. She got dressed and placed her blue pajama pants in the hamper, where they would later be found. Scott got out of bed at around 8 a.m. and they had breakfast together. At around 8:40 a.m., Laci went on the computer while Scott showered. Internet history from the Peterson home from that morning would confirm that MSN, a Yahoo weather site, and 2 shopping sites were accessed that morning around that time. Scott begins getting dressed at around 8:45 a.m. and he and Laci talk about their plans for the day, with Laci mentioning to him that she was going to walk the dog, go to the store, and make gingerbread for their dinner with her parents that was planned for later that evening, as well as make French toast to serve for their Christmas brunch. Scott spoke with Laci's mother shortly after, describing how Laci looked cute because she was styling her hair the way Amy, her sister, had taught her. This phone call was confirmed and recorded. Scott then loaded 3 patio umbrellas into his truck, which he was planning on taking to his warehouse. While outside loading the truck with the umbrellas, he sees his neighbor Kristen Dempwolf, and they exchange brief greetings. Scott then went back inside to fill the mop bucket because Laci had mentioned she was going to mop the floors. Scott and Laci then watched television together until around 10 a.m. Scott even was able to tell police the show that they were watching, The Today Show with Martha Stewart, where she was making cookies and meringue, which was confirmed to be on television on December 24th at 9:48 a.m. Somewhere between 10 and 10:30 a.m., Scott then says he leaves the house through the French doors, which were essentially their back doors, and made his way to the warehouse, located within an office complex. Between 10:30 and 11 a.m., Scott enters the warehouse, logs into his computer, and checks his email. He sends one email to his boss, who has left him a Happy Holidays voicemail. Computer logs show him using the computer continuously between 10:30 a.m. and 10:56 a.m. Scott then logs off his computer, and for the next 20 minutes he says he was tidying up the warehouse and office as well as beginning to assemble the woodworking tool he had just purchased. It's worth noting that the warehouse that Scott was in during this stretch of time was too small for him to pull his truck in and close the warehouse door. So if Scott was transferring a body from his car to his boat in the warehouse, he would have had to do so in broad daylight. Scott had originally planned to go golfing that morning. However, it was too cold. So instead, Scott says he decided to go fishing. He hooks up his boat to his truck and drives it out of the warehouse at around 11:18 a.m. The drive from the warehouse to the Berkeley Marina is about an hour and a half, which matches up with Scott's timeline of events. He arrives at the marina and purchases a boat ticket at 12:54 p.m. The boat ticket was logged into evidence and given to police later that day as proof that Scott had really been to the marina. Between 1 p.m. and a little after 2 p.m., Scott launches his boat and motors north approximately 2 miles. While out on the water, he remembers seeing a little island full of trash with a no landing sign on it. This was confirmed to be Brooks Island, and had the no landing sign Scott claimed he had seen. He also says he'd forgotten a bag of new lures he had purchased in his truck, and had instead used freshwater jigs from his tackle box to fish. The bag of new lures was found in his truck later that day. The fishing pole Scott used also had the freshwater jig on it, as he had said. Scott then says when he arrived back at the marina a little after 2 p.m., he chatted with some maintenance workers and a few other men around the marina about fishing, and even had an interaction where some of the maintenance workers were laughing due to how much Scott was struggling to back his truck down the ramp to rehook his boat. One of the maintenance workers was later questioned by police, and he corroborated Scott's story. Scott then left the marina and began driving home, and was on the road between 2:15 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. During the drive, he tried to call Laci at home and on her cell phone, and left a voicemail. He also called his friend Greg Reed as well as his parents. All of these calls were confirmed to have taken place from cell phone records. Scott stops for gas at 3:25 p.m., confirmed by bank records, and calls Laci again at 3:52 p.m., confirmed by cell phone records. He arrives back at the warehouse at 4:13 p.m. Scott unhooks the boat and quickly checks his office before heading home. It is estimated that Scott arrives home between 4:30 and 4:45 p.m. He finds the dog in the yard, but no Laci. It was later discovered that a neighbor had seen the dog, Mackenzie, running around the street, and had placed him back in the Peterson yard. Scott enters the home, empties the mop bucket, and gets the mail. He notices that Laci's car is there, but Laci is nowhere to be found. Scott assumes that she was at her mother's house preparing for Christmas Eve dinner. His clothes were still damp from fishing, so he put them in the washer. He then ate a slice of pizza and took a shower before listening to some of their voicemails. One of those voicemails was from Ron Gransky, Laci's stepfather, asking them to bring whipped cream when they came over that evening. This voicemail prompted Scott to call Ron, since he had assumed Laci was already there. This call took place at around 5:17 p.m. This is when Scott discovers that Laci is not at her parents' house. At this point, Scott begins to search for Laci. In the next 30 minutes, Scott would make 2 more calls to Laci's mom and Ron. Scott began knocking on neighbors' doors, calling neighbors and friends of Laci, and headed to the park with Mackenzie, since that's where he assumed Laci would have taken Mackenzie on her walk. At 5:47 p.m., Ron calls 911 to report Laci missing. Scott meets police at the park, and he's taken for questioning. That is Scott's entire timeline, and whether you believe it or not, it is established that almost all of what Scott said happened could be and was verified. From the phone call made to Laci's mom that morning, to the specific television program that was on, to the email he sent to his boss at the warehouse, to the marina ticket, to the maintenance employee he spoke to the gas station payment, and the voicemails he left on Laci's phone as he drove back to their house. All of it was confirmed to have taken place within the time frame he gave to police. Police even searched with sonar the areas where Scott Peterson had claimed to have been fishing, but found nothing of interest. If you're listening to this and you believe that Scott is the #1 suspect, this might present somewhat of a conundrum. With Scott's story so meticulously time-stamped and corroborated, this leaves very little tolerance on when and how Scott could have done something to his wife and disposed of the body, because at this point, there was no body, no evidence, nothing at all.
And you mentioned right off the start that you haven't been in the media.
No. It was for the first 3 days or so when she disappeared. It was an absolute privacy issue. Not showing the grief of our family, not exploiting that. After that, it was a conscious decision to remain out of the media eye, decided upon by everyone in the family and the volunteers, in order to, and I'm sorry to say it to media, but to keep the media here, to keep them hungry for, an interview with me or a picture, so that they would keep coming back, so this story won't fall through the cracks, as it has happened with other missing people, with other abductions. And it's up to the family to keep that going. So we made that conscious decision together.
And now might be a good time to mention what the public perception of Scott was at this time. The days after Laci disappeared, the case began to spread across news outlets and media like wildfire. A missing pregnant woman is a newsworthy case, no doubt, but when the husband, who came across as charming and handsome, becomes suspect number one, well, that certainly is blood in the water for the media. Everyone had an opinion on the case, and what they believed happened to Laci. And the number one theory was that Scott had something to do with it. Scott Peterson reached almost celebrity status, with reporters accosting him left and right to try to get a statement from him. Throughout this phase of the investigation, Laci's family still supported Scott. There were many reasons why the public vilified Scott as much as they did, and I'll go through just a few of the main reasons. Number one, he refused to take a polygraph. Now initially, when pitched the idea of taking a polygraph by the detective in the first interview, Scott said, sure, he would take one. He would quickly walk that back, however, and refused to take a polygraph that day or any subsequent day he was asked. Now, to the public, refusal to take a polygraph test is like a death sentence for your innocence, because if you have nothing to hide, why would you be afraid of taking a polygraph? A lot of reasons, actually. Here's a clip from Matt Orchard's video, The Lie of the Polygraph, in which he dissects not only the history of the polygraph, but also its use as a tool to establish truth.
The polygraph's role as an interrogation prop is the single most important thing you need to appreciate when understanding what its true purpose is. A little later, we'll break down the performance tactics involved with a real-life example. But for now, broadly speaking, the trick behind the polygraph, especially in a criminal context, is that it's only as effective as the person being subjected to it believes it to be. Because polygraph results are barely ever admissible in court, even badly failing an exam won't really have a detrimental effect on one's prospects of avoiding a conviction if they just scoff at the results and walk away. But if they buy into the lie that they have been caught out and are now left without any recourse, it can go a long way to procuring a confession, which, needless to say, can lead one much closer to a long stretch in prison. And so, a large portion of the polygrapher's job has nothing to do with conducting the actual test, but rather selling the subject on the validity of its results.
If you take the polygraph and pass, great. It doesn't automatically absolve someone or put them above suspicion. A failed polygraph, though, can be pretty damning as far as the court of public opinion, even more so than refusing to take one. And you can definitely fail a polygraph even if you're being truthful. Number 2. Scott wasn't acting right. To the public, Scott's actions just didn't line up with how a grieving husband whose wife had gone missing should be acting. Scott was heavily publicized in the media, with video and pictures of him being taken any time he left his home. And to the watchful eyes of the public, Scott appeared unconcerned and aloof. The most damning example of this taking place during a vigil for Laci. Scott was in attendance, but he refused to speak. Fair enough. However, during the vigil, a picture of Scott was taken that would be plastered all over the media and come back to haunt him again and again. This one. Scott Peterson, smiling, with 2 other people during his missing wife's vigil. Now on one side, someone might look at this and say, see, he's smiling. Clearly he doesn't care about his missing wife at all. He should be perpetually shrouded in misery. The corners of his mouth should be curved downward at all times, and his face should be soaked 24/7 from all the tears he's crying. Anything outside of this is clearly objective evidence that he did something to his wife. I'm obviously being hyperbolic here, but a picture of someone smiling at what should be a somber event is not an objective barometer of guilt. Just like the way someone reacts to any given situation doesn't necessarily give anything regarding that individual's culpability. Lest we forget the case of Amanda Knox, whose roommate was murdered and who was convicted based almost solely on her demeanor alone, lambasted in the media for not being sad enough and not acting right. Amanda Knox spent almost 4 years in an Italian prison before being acquitted. Strange or mismatched behavior or reactions do not equate to guilt simply because everyone reacts differently to any given situation, especially high-stress situations. That being said, His behavior during interviews did come across as odd, but I'll let you gauge that for yourself. Here's a clip from a 2003 news interview with Scott shortly after Laci's disappearance.
Why would you leave Laci, who was 8.5 months pregnant, alone to go fishing on Christmas Eve?
Okay. Our day was planned for, Christmas Eve dinner at our mom's house. Preparations were all made, gifts done. Laci was simply going to be baking that day. And it's not uncommon for us to, simply, we have separate pursuits. She does not, play golf as I do, which was my other option for that day. And being, 7.5 months pregnant, she's not going to want to go out in a boat. But it's simply a leisure activity to pursue that day.
On why you're not going to take it?
I'm not going to comment if I have or have not taken a polygraph with the police.
The life insurance policy. Why take one out on Laci? $250,000?
We have life insurance policies in place that were established when we bought this home that you're in right now 2 years ago. There was no life insurance policy taken out recently, as has been reported in the National Enquirer, the dubious source of alien information as well.
I know that a neighbor saw you removing things on the 24th. You mentioned this morning that it was umbrellas?
Yeah, we have some large umbrellas for the backyard pool area. Market umbrellas, I think, is the term for them.
Why would you store those in the winter?
It started to rain, so I was going to store them. Just like you asked, why would I store them? I was taking them from the pool to store.
Okay. Officials of mine have told me, sources have mentioned to me, that there were cement bags that were in the storage area, and apparently a few of them were empty.
Sure.
Explain that.
Well, I could take you out in the backyard and show you all the cement work and brickwork that we've done to this home, and you'd find, cement bags around here.
So this was something that, it was home remodeling, or what were you doing with the cement?
Yeah. And again, we're starting to go into areas that investigators have asked me not to comment about, so we should probably, simply put the brakes on at that point.
Okay.
I don't mind commenting about the life insurance policy, but I don't want to give specific times or other information that could jeopardize what they find is valuable information in finding Laci.
So, the public didn't like Scott because he refused to take a polygraph. But all said and done, refusal to take a polygraph might just be due to the knowledge of how unreliable polygraphs can be, and how much it can be used against you should you fail for some reason other than being untruthful. And the public didn't like Scott because he wasn't behaving properly. But in reality, no one can dictate how a human being is supposed to behave in a stressful, emotional situation. So all in all, it seems like all of this suspicion around Scott was hasty and half-baked, not based on anything of Oh. Wait, I forgot. Reason number 3 why the public vilified Scott Peterson. He was cheating on his wife at the time of her disappearance. He apparently had multiple extramarital affairs, the most notable of which pertaining to the case was with a woman named Amber Frey.
Okay, first of all, I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002. I was introduced to him. I was told he was unmarried. Scott told me he was not married. We did have a romantic relationship. When I discovered he was involved in the Laci Peterson disappearance case, I immediately contacted the Modesto Police Department. Although I could have sold the photos of Scott and I to tabloids, I knew this was not the right thing to do. For fear of jeopardizing the case or the police investigation, I will not comment further.
On January 24, 2003, Amber Frey came forward and revealed her romantic relationship with Scott Peterson that was taking place during his wife's disappearance. She stated that she was unaware he was married, and once she realized the connection between Scott and Laci, the missing woman who had been all over the news, she knew she had to come forward. So while his refusal to take a polygraph may have been telling but not damning, and his strange behavior may have just been the overactive imaginations of the public, Scott Peterson cheating on his wife with another woman around the same time as she went missing, and telling his mistress that his wife died and he would be spending the holidays alone? Yeah, that certainly isn't the best look. And just like that, it starts to become much more difficult to defend Scott Peterson. But there would be another major shift in the case that would change things even more. On April 13, 2003, a little over 3 months after Laci Peterson went missing from her home in Modesto, a male fetus at or near full term was found about a mile away from the East Bay in Richmond. And at the East Bay itself, right on the shore, a badly decomposed torso of a woman was discovered. The woman had been decapitated and her limbs were missing. Police were called to the scene, as well as the team of investigators who were working on the Laci Peterson case. A few days later, on April 18th, the bodies were confirmed to be that of Laci Peterson and their son, who they had planned to name Connor. Due to decomposition, as well as how long the bodies had been in the water, an exact cause of death could not be established. Although no direct evidence existed to tie Scott to the murder of his wife and unborn son, on April 18th, 2003, Scott was arrested near a La Jolla golf course. The circumstances around his arrest were also very odd, to say the least. You see, when police arrested Scott, he claimed he was simply at the course to meet his father and brother for a game of golf. But his hair, which was naturally dark and brown up to this point, was dyed blonde. His car was packed with various items, including $15,000 in cash, 12 Viagra tablets, camping and survival gear, several changes of clothes, and 4 cell phones. Now, on one side, the argument was made that due to all of the extreme media attention Scott was experiencing, he altered his appearance so as not to be easily spotted by the press, which would explain the dyeing of his hair. And he had been living out of his car because so many photographers and journalists were camping outside of his home waiting for him to emerge, which would explain why his car was so jam-packed with many strange, miscellaneous items. The counter-argument to this, of course, was Scott was planning on fleeing to Mexico and simply was caught by police before he could do so. On April 21, 2003, Scott was charged with 2 felony counts of murder with premeditation in special circumstances. He, of course, pleaded not guilty. His trial had to be moved to San Mateo County, nearly an hour and a half away because so many people were already thoroughly convinced of Scott's guilt. The trial began on June 1, 2004, and wouldn't fully conclude until the following year. Due to the media circus surrounding the Peterson case, cameras were banned from the courtroom. Scott's initial questioning by police, the phone calls made between himself and Amber Frey, as well as Scott's timeline of events were all presented. And on November 12, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Laci Peterson and the second-degree murder of Connor Peterson. A month later, the jury would recommend that Scott Peterson be sentenced to death. A few months later, on March 16, 2005, the judge would follow the jury recommendation and sentence Scott Peterson to death for the murder of his wife and unborn son. As a result of their death, Scott's guilty verdict, and the relentless publicizing of the case by the media, the Unborn Victims of Violence Act was passed in 2004, which recognizes an embryo or fetus in utero as a legal victim if they're injured or killed during the commission of a federal crime of violence. After various blocked appeals by Scott, in March 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom issued a moratorium for all 737 prisoners on death row in California, including Scott Peterson, which would in essence indefinitely postpone all executions. And after a successful appeal regarding his death penalty sentence, the California Supreme Court would overturn his death sentence on August 24, 2020.
The California Supreme Court has overturned the death sentence. Peterson's lawyers had contended all along he was not able to get a fair trial because of all the pre-trial publicity with the case, but the court rejected that argument, yet it did say that the trial judge made a series of clear and significant errors in jury selection that undermined Peterson's right to an impartial jury during the penalty phase, and that potential jurors...
Now, on the surface, it would appear that this tragic case of a pregnant woman and an unfaithful murderous husband would come to an end. Justice served, albeit with the dark cloud of Laci and Connor's death hanging above everyone affected by these horrible events. Scott, an unforgivable monster, was getting what he deserved for what he did to the people he should have cared for most. But despite the bow that seemed to be tied around this case with the conclusion of the trial and the death penalty sentencing, there still exists quite a few questions regarding the specifics of the case and what really happened on that morning of December 24th, 2002. With Laci's body so decomposed, a true cause of death could not be determined. The prosecutor argued that Laci Peterson was smothered to death by Scott, who then mutilated her and dumped her body. But police had done a thorough search of the house and found no physical evidence tying Scott to the murder whatsoever. No blood, no sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds on Scott, no DNA evidence in the home, or the boat, or the truck, or the warehouse. And since Laci had been decapitated, there was no way to prove she was actually smothered. And if Scott killed her that morning before she left to walk the dog, why was the dog loose when the neighbor found him and returned him to the Peterson yard? At what point did Scott actually kill Laci? And how did he manage to kill Laci, clean up the crime scene, mutilate Laci's body, load her into his truck, get to the warehouse, transfer the body into his boat, drive to the marina, dispose of the body, all without being seen, and all within his very specific window of events, which was, for the most part, corroborated and time-stamped? The defense argued that Laci was abducted by an unknown perpetrator who ended up being her killer. But there's no hard evidence of this either. If this was the case, Laci would have to have been abducted as soon as she stepped out of the house to walk the dog, which would explain why the dog was running around alone in the street. But if she was grabbed outside of her home, what are the chances that no one saw anything? And then there was Connor. What were the circumstances that led to Connor being found where he was? How did Connor die? A big question regarding the case was, did Connor actually survive outside of the womb for any length of time? All of these questions lack substantial answers. And then there was Scott Peterson himself. Why did he choose to do a random fishing trip on Christmas Eve morning? Why was he not the first person to call the police? What was the true reason behind his strange behavior the days and weeks after the disappearance of his wife? And could emotions from his extramarital affairs triggered him to commit such a heinous crime against his own family? These questions may never have answers, which leads to a situation where you may fall into one of two viewpoints. Scott Peterson is a cold-blooded killer who planned and carried out his wife's murder as well as the murder of his unborn son, leaving zero physical evidence and adhering to a very stringent timetable, and he certainly is getting what he deserves. Or Scott Peterson is a man who found himself in a very unfortunate situation full of very tragic coincidences. He happened to be cheating on his wife, happened to make a comment that his wife was dead weeks before she vanished and was found dead, happened to be out on a spontaneous fishing trip all during the time period his wife and unborn son would be abducted and killed by an unknown attacker, an attacker who left no evidence, also leaving Scott to take all the blame. Whichever side you fall on, you'll have to contend with a series of unanswered questions that inject just the slightest feeling of doubt as to the true circumstances around Laci and Connor's death. But there is no doubt that during a time of turmoil, the Laci Peterson case captured the attention of the masses, who had until that point been mostly inundated with the relentless coverage of death, destruction, terrorist organizations, and global warfare. Something about the Laci Peterson case struck a chord with many. A pretty, expectant mother with a beaming smile, cut down before her time, before a major milestone in her life began. Her friends described her as fun, unpredictable, and silly at times. She didn't play by the rules, didn't sugarcoat things. Laci, according to those that knew her, was 100% unapologetically Laci, and that was what made her so appealing to those that knew her. As of the making of this video, Scott Peterson is serving out his life sentence in San Quentin State Prison. He has maintained his innocence and hopes for a retrial.